Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
How's everyone doing? I see that we have some on.
Good.
I appreciate you all coming today. This is my first Zoom presentation. I'm sure you all are pros at it by now, but bear with me if I get knocked off my internet. I'll be right back. It only happens at the most opportune times. But first of all, I just want to thank Dean Della Coletta for having me today to present to you all on how we can support faculty in response to students in distress and disruption. My presentation is going to cover a couple of these areas. So first, we're going to look at current data that we have at UC San Diego. Also, how students are being impacted by COVID-19 and what that is looking like on our campus. We'll talk about some indicators of distress and how to recognize when students are in distress, whether we're on campus or in a remote environment. And then also discuss some disruptive behavior in the classroom and what that may look like, strategies for addressing disruptive behavior. And then we'll wrap it up with resources for faculty in both of these areas. So resources for faculty to help students in distress, and then resources also to help faculty address disruptive behavior in the classroom environment. All right, I wanted to start just by sharing some national data that we have from the National College Health Assessment. And this is from the spring of 2019. And this is an assessment that's done regularly across the nation. Really, it's a very extensive assessment, but I just pulled a few things to highlight because it relates to specifically to students in distress. So first of all, just wanted to mention that this is the percentage of students who responded on a national level, on a UC level, and then here at UC San Diego. So the first item was students feeling things were hopeless anytime within the last 12 months. On a national level, 57.5 students felt that way. On a UC level, it was 63.5, so a little higher than the national average. And then on the UC San Diego level, around the same as the other UCs, but a little higher than the national level, 63.1. The assessment also looked at the percentage of students who reported feeling lonely anytime in the last 12 months. So on the national level, it was about 67.4%, UC level 73%, and again, UCSD 70.5. So we are having a higher level of loneliness and hopelessness than at the national level, but just by some, but we're very similar to the UC system. Also, the percentage of students who reported seriously considering suicide anytime in the last 12 months, 14.4 on a national level, 14.5 on a UC level, and 15.5 at UC San Diego. So the reason we're doing this presentation is, we know this is not why faculty get into teaching, right? They don't come every day to assist students in distress necessarily, but it is a part of all of our jobs. And so we just want to be aware of what our students are feeling and what they're facing so we can intervene early and get them help, but also want you to feel supported in the job that you do in your role in supporting students. So I also pulled some specific numbers to UC San Diego, and this is from this past academic year, so since the fall of 2019. We looked at students of concern, and when we talk about students of concern, we're really talking about students who face multiple challenges that impact or potentially can impact their academic success in a negative way. And so in the fall of 2019, we saw about 380 students of concern, students that we had identified as students of concern. Out of that 380, about 181 were referred for case management services. And I'm sorry, I should have introduced myself at the beginning. I know it was on the beginning slide, but I'm Mary Anderson, and I'm the Director of Case Management Services here at UC San Diego. So this 181 number are the number of students that meet with my team on a regular basis. And so typically students are referred to the Dean of Student Affairs in the undergraduate colleges, or else the Assistant Dean of the Graduate Division in Student Affairs if they are struggling on campus in various areas. And then from there, that Dean of Student Affairs will make referrals to case managers who we have embedded in the colleges, the undergraduate colleges, as well as we have one who serves specifically graduate students in the graduate division. So 181 students were referred for case management services. You can see for basic needs in the fall, we had about 75 students who had submitted basic needs assistance forms. And that relates to students who are in need of housing or food or some other type of financial need, but typically basic needs refers to those two areas of food and housing. And then, as you can see, in the fall of 2019, we had 57 students who were transported to the hospital, and that's typically for anything from suicidal ideation to suicide attempts to psychosis, students who might be gravely disabled and unable to take care of themselves. And then just a few were probably related to severe alcohol and drug incidents. The last number you see for fall of 2019 is the Triton Concern Line calls, and we'll talk in depth about the Triton Concern Line and what that is. But that is the line that faculty and staff call for students if they are concerned about a student. And we had 62 of those calls. So that was from the fall. Winter quarter was pretty similar to fall quarter. It dropped a little in various areas except for basic needs. That went up. And also we went down in hospital transports in Triton Concern Line. So some of that may be due to the adjustment of students coming to campus in the fall. There are a variety of reasons. It might be students are feeling more connected by winter quarter, so they're not as vulnerable to some of the needs that they may have had when they first arrived on campus. But as you can see for spring 2020, when we went remote due to COVID-19, the numbers have changed drastically. And so we are not getting as many of student of concern referrals. And part of that, we believe, is because we're just not seeing students as much. The referrals that we are getting are typically through the Triton Concern Line or from faculty directly who have had interactions with students where they are concerned. Or sometimes students are self-identifying to their deans of student affairs to let them know that they're struggling. And so we've seen about 77 students of concern, and these numbers were pulled through yesterday, so May 14th. In addition to the 77, we've had 32 who have been referred to case management services. Again, that's ongoing connection to a case manager. So that might be a student that's meeting with a case manager weekly to eliminate or reduce some of the barriers and challenges they're facing to academic success. Where we really shot up this quarter is in our basic needs assistance forms. We have seen over 1,500 basic needs assistance forms, and that is because students are struggling with loss of job, loss of income. You know, some of them have moved home, yet they still have apartments in San Diego that they're paying for. So they just are in need. And we'll talk about some of the ways that they have been supported with that need. Also, as you can see, hospital transports are down. We are only at 3 this quarter, and those 3, 2 of them were on campus, and 1 was in Washington that we learned about, actually, that we were involved in. And so I'll tell you how a faculty member played into that situation and the important role that the faculty member played. And then, of course, Triton Concern Line calls are down as well to only 23 up till yesterday. Again, this is only through yesterday, so we still have some weeks to go in this quarter, but we still expect to see a decrease in the face-to-face referrals that we've seen over time. ask questions as I go along, feel free to ask. This is meant to be informal and educational for you all, and I want to make sure that you all get the questions that you need answered. So I did want to talk specifically about some needs that we're seeing come out of COVID-19 for students and what students are saying. Active Minds, which is a nonprofit educational organization that really is committed to the mental health of students, released a study, and they conducted the study in April of about 2,100 college students, and these were some of the findings that they found based on specific questions related to COVID-19. So 1 in 5 college students say that their mental health has worsened since the crisis, since the health crisis has started. 80% report that COVID-19 has negatively impacted their mental health. So that's really concerning, and that's why it's important that we're still, interacting with students and intervening early to connect them with resources. Most common ways that their lives have been impacted are stress and anxiety. So 91% are reporting that they are experiencing stress and anxiety, disappointment or sadness, about 81%. Loneliness or isolation, we're seeing at 80%. And I've actually, some of the students that I've interacted with this quarter, that has been their main challenge, is the isolation that they're feeling, even those who are living on campus, because they're not interacting as much with other people in general. And we have so many virtual events and ways to connect right now, but either students are zoomed out, or they don't want to use the technology, or they just don't know where to find all the events. And so we've been doing a lot of advertising around, here's how you can connect with other students, here's how you can connect with mental health professionals, to hopefully combat some of that loneliness and isolation that they're feeling. 56% said they've been impacted just by having to relocate. So as we know, most of our students have gone elsewhere, whether it's home or, I think most of them have probably gone home. We do have quite a few still on campus, but those were students who either home wasn't a safe place for them to go, or potentially like international students that couldn't get back home. That's who's currently living with us. And then 48% have reported experiencing financial setback due to the COVID-19. In addition, they're reporting, 76% are reporting they have trouble maintaining a routine, and also trouble getting enough exercise. They find it challenging to stay connected with others, so 63% reported that in this study. Now this is where you all may have a particular interest. They also, 85% have reported that focusing on school and work despite distractions has been the most difficult. So even though they may have less distractions on a day-to-day, some of them are still experiencing distractions where they're living. So some of them are living at home and they may not have a study area to study in consistently without other people around, or they're just worried about the health crisis, and so their focus is not as focused as it usually is. Oops. Also, 79%, despite COVID-19, students feel hopeful about achieving their school-related goals and their future job prospects, and basically said that they would continue with their academic goals no matter what circumstances were occurring. We also, so they also, these were the areas where where students said that higher ed administrators and faculty should be focusing their area to help during this time. So increased academic support, which looks like more leniency, accommodations, and flexibility. I know we have been hearing that from our own students, right? I'm sure you all have been hearing it too. They, especially at the beginning when they were adjusting to the remote learning, they were asking for more leniency and flexibility during that time. More mental health resources, so increased investment in counseling and coping resources. I know that Reina Juarez and some of her staff presented to you all a couple of weeks ago on the services that they provide. So they're fully up and running with their telemental health as well as their groups. And so I'm sure they mentioned that when they spoke to you a couple of weeks ago. Focus on soft skills. So just developing empathy, compassion, communication, and understanding. Also validation for the burdens that students are experiencing during this time. That was important to students as far as higher ed administrators go. Also more opportunities for social connection. So replacing the events that have been canceled and with virtual events, which I think UC San Diego has done a good job at. I just don't think that enough students are learning about it. Engaging in long-term planning. So colleges need to be prepared to help students heal and recover when they return and put in place improved practices and protocols to more easily pivot to remote learning in case of another similar crisis. So I think by the end of this, we'll probably all be experts in that area, or at least more comfortable with pivoting to remote learning if necessary, but hopefully we won't have to again. So now I wanted to move into really talking about students in distress and how to recognize a student in distress. Again, this is our definition for students in distress or a student of concern, and that's a student whose academic progress or functioning has been adversely affected due to a number of indicators that are impacting their well-being or the well-being of others. And we kind of use those terms interchangeably here, a student in distress or a student of concern. We're trying to shift a little bit more to recognizing that students are in this category are typically in distress. And again, these terms that we use are inward facing and not outward facing. We had a situation once where a student identified themselves as a student of concern. So I just like to put that out there in these presentations that's just something we use inwardly to identify them, but not, we don't want to label any student out there. This next slide is a distress continuum, and really what it shows is the continuum of distress that a student can be on at any given time. And so of course we want them to be focused and balanced and in a good place where they can accomplish all of their goals, their personal goals, their academic goals. But of course, sometimes other things get in the way, right? And so there is a distress continuum that they may find themselves on. So any of these things on the distress continuum can enter their life at any given time, and that could throw them out of whack or throw them into distress. And so our goal as educators and as people who support students, if we're being student-centered, what we want to do is we want to identify when students are facing these challenges early so we can intervene early, hopefully get them back on track and make sure that they get connected to resources that they need so they can maintain their safety and their success here at the university. What I like to say is really what we just should all engage in on a day-to-day basis is really creating a culture of care for our students. And I know, since I've only been at UC San Diego since August, but I've seen with faculty and staff a real centeredness, a real commitment to this topic and to really supporting students. And so I already know that you all wouldn't be here today unless you felt that way as well. So again, this is kind of a combo presentation of how we support our students, but also how we support faculty to support our students. So some of the emotional indicators you may recognize when students are in distress are changes in mood. So they may be up and down. It may be a student that is typically happy or kind of easygoing, who seems all of a sudden very stressed or has a lot of anxiety, or maybe they are just down or sad. So any kind of mood swings is an important emotional indicator. Of course, we usually connect a student who's crying or tearful, especially frequently, as someone who might be in distress. So again, sometimes it's okay to cry, right? We all cry sometimes. But if there's a student who frequently cries or outwardly cries just over things that don't seem like they would be as distressing, there could be more going on with that student. So it's important to check in with them. High levels of anxiety or panic attacks. We know our students are having or reporting higher levels of anxiety. And so just recognizing that, and students are more open about some of the things that they face. So having anxiety or having diagnosed depression, they may tell you that up front, so you're aware of it. So, and then sometimes you will just notice it because they've had a change in their behavior in some way. Unprovoked anger or hostility could be an emotional indicator of distress. Increased agitation, being excessively dependent. So that's a student that might latch on to you. It's probably a little harder in a remote environment now, but when you're in the classroom, or they may come to your office hours every chance they get. They may try to connect with you after class or before class. And so sometimes that excessive dependency is a sign of distress. Some clearer indicators of distress is when they come right out and say, they're expressing some type of hopelessness or fear or worthlessness. And it's really important that we explore those phrases when they say things like that. So a student may say, it's just not worth it anymore. And it's really important to explore that and find out, well, what's not worth it anymore? Tell me a little bit about that. Is this class not worth it anymore? Is being at UC San Diego not worth it anymore? Because you may find out that they mean, it's just not worth living anymore. Or it may just be, this class isn't worth it anymore and maybe I should consider withdrawing. So it's really important that we just explore some of those expressions that they may put out to us at any given time. And then, of course, any type of suicidal ideation would be an emotional indicator of distress that we would need to act on immediately. Some physical indicators that you may notice are increased physical health complaints. So maybe they're just getting sick more, or they're talking about some just complaining of their overall well-being. They're not feeling well. They're feeling tired. Continual episodes of illness, colds, or flu. Now, in this environment, it might mean something more, but we have seen in studies. I recently read a study, and it was a study of Asian women in Korea and Japan, I believe. And they had indicated that when they have symptoms of distress, it usually it appeared more often in physical indicators. So it might have been gastrointestinal issues or headaches, something that we might just kind of shrug off as physical, or that student's not feeling well. So it's important to recognize that that could also be a distress indicator. Just being tired all the time, maybe problem sleeping. Sometimes we'll see students who sleep too much. Sometimes we'll see students who sleep too little, and either can be a problem if it continues over a period of time. Some of the behavioral indicators that we might recognize are increased procrastination. So maybe a student who is really on top of things at first, maybe they fall off and their procrastination has been increasing. They're not doing as well in their class. Maybe they're withdrawing from friends and family. They might be neglecting their own personal care or hygiene. So they may show up, disheveled, or maybe they haven't been bathing, something of that nature. Being excessively demanding of others can sometimes be a behavioral indicator of distress. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about disruptive behavior, because a lot of times, when we think about students being disruptive, we just think about them being a problem, but a lot of times distress can appear as disruption. And so it's important that we explore that a little bit more as well. An increase in impulsive or risky behavior. So they might be drinking more. They might be, engaging in other substance abuse or other risky behaviors, and that could be a sign of distress. Self-harm. So sometimes students will self-harm when they're in distress, and that might appear as cutting, sometimes burning. And it doesn't always mean that they're suicidal. Some of them use it as a coping mechanism, but it is concerning, and we would want to intervene early if we recognized or knew that there was some self-harming behaviors involved. An increase in alcohol or drug use, I kind of mentioned that with the impulsive or risky behaviors. And then, of course, any type of violent acts towards self or others would be a behavioral indicator of distress that we would want to recognize.
Mine's all frozen up. Is everybody else still hearing Mary?
No.
No, I think she froze.
Frozen. She's frozen.
There oops.
Uh-oh.
She'll be back in a couple minutes.
Okay.
She usually comes right back. I know the internet is a little bit wonky.
Okay. Vanessa, what is that amazing garden behind you? Oh, wait, you're muted.
I wish it was real, but it's not. I wish it was mine. There's even some little cows in the background, but no, it is just to kind of cheer me up with its color.
Pretty awesome. Yeah.
I want cow.
I think Mary's back.
She's back.
I am back. I apologize.
Welcome back. It happens every class.
I knew this was going to happen. I just knew it. And it usually just happens in the afternoon. But Anna, who is on my team, she can tell you that there's usually a staff meeting I'm talking in that knocked off of. Okay, talking about academic indicators of distress. So I think you probably heard me talking about maybe the consistent failure to turn in work or complete assignments, maybe a decline in their quality of the students' work. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I could see you before, but I can't see you anymore. And so that was my clue that I got knocked offline. So Anna, if I do get knocked offline again, you may have to text me again.
We
Sounds
can't
good.
we can't see your PowerPoint anymore, though.
Oh, you
or
can't?
iPad.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah, you might need to reshare your
let me fix that.
screen.
Yeah, that's good.
Now everyone can see it. Oops, I skipped ahead. Okay, sorry about that. Some other indicators of academic distress, just poor performance and preparation, requests for special considerations. So that might be students who are coming up and asking you, maybe not coming up during this time, but asking you, can I turn a paper in late? Can I turn an assignment in late? Can I have an extension on this project? I haven't had time to study for an exam. Can I take it next week instead? So whatever that might be, sometimes that is an indicator of some type of distress. So it's just important to stay aware of that. And it's also important to know that just because students are experiencing distress, like we want to be compassionate and caring, and we want to connect them to the resources that can help them. But you don't always have to make accommodations for them, especially if it's something that is continuous. Like at some point that student does have to kind of take responsibility and decide whether or not they can maintain their academic achievement with whatever it is that they're going through. And that's what, my team is here to help with, as well as deans of student affairs. So I just like to throw that out there because sometimes because faculty are so caring, they continuously give some accommodations to the point where it gets hard to actually give that student a grade, right? So just making sure you're connecting with resources if you're feeling that way. Avoiding participation. So some students might avoid participation or get excessively anxious when they're called upon in class. And then sometimes you'll see disturbing content in writings or presentations. And that's where I wanted to talk about where a faculty member really did a great job. This was a few weeks ago. We were in the remote environment, and they got an email from a student that indicated that the student was definitely in distress. They had mentioned that they had spent the day trying to kill themselves unsuccessfully, obviously, is what they put in the email. And that they were not prepared to do something the next day. I don't know if it was take a test or something of that nature, because they had spent all day trying to kill themselves. Now, the student sent that email at 9 o'clock in the morning, and the faculty member did not see that email until like 1 a.m. later that night, or early the next morning, I should say. But still acted on it immediately when they read it. And what they did was they called the Triton Concern Line. The Triton Concern Line consulted with that faculty member. That the Triton Concern Line contacted case management services, and the deans of student affairs serve in a on-call duty rotation for the Triton Concern Line. And so they contacted the person who was on call, who was a case manager on my team, about this student. The student was located in Washington State, and the staff member on call connected with our university police, who gave them the agency information to call in Washington where the student lived. Our on-call person called the police. They did a welfare check on the student, and the student ended up being transported to the hospital. So it was really important that, sorry, I thought I froze, that faculty member did do the follow-up that was necessary. And it was clearly needed, since the student did end up getting transported to the hospital that night. So just wanted to say, you all really play an important role in the health and well-being of students.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
Is that always, let me put my video on here. Is that always the sequence of events? This leads to that, leads to that, leads to that, leads to police? Or is there a progression of things? Like, what if somebody just needs more like someone to talk to, and the next thing you know, they're getting handcuffed?
Oh, yes, no. So it's really going to depend on the situation, and also kind of the information that's given at the time that person contacts the Triton Concern Line. But yes, so for instance, when I left out a few steps. So when the case manager on my team was called, he initially tried to call the dean of student affairs, because usually they consult on these types of cases. The dean of student affairs, again, it was 1 o'clock in the morning, so they had not answered their phone. So he called me, and what I said was, let's first try to call the student and see how the student's doing. Because again, the initial email came in at 9 o'clock in the morning, and now it was 1 o'clock the next morning. And then I said, if you cannot get the student, let's see if we have an emergency contact that we can call. Because we knew the student was, it was reported anyway that they were at home in Washington. So potentially there was a family member who was an emergency contact that was there with them that we could have connected with as well. So the case manager called the student first, did not get a response, called the emergency contact on file, didn't get a response. So the only real option we had left was to do a welfare check on that student based on the information that was provided.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so we're going to move on to disruptive behavior. And I don't want you to think I'm just going to dump all that information on you and then not tell you what to do with it. We're going to, we're going to review the support resources available for you at the end of this presentation. But also wanted just to talk about disruptive behavior because it's one of those things that, you know, as a faculty member in a class environment, you're somewhat expected to, well, you are expected to respond to it, or you have to manage it yourselves. But it's one of those things that nobody really receives any formal training in, right? So you become experts in your discipline and go into teaching, wanting to teach students, but you don't really get any training or guidance necessarily. Maybe some do, and others, but most do not in how to manage your classroom environment. And so, and it's hard, right? I mean, I ask every time I do this presentation in person, I usually ask, like, who comes to work every day just excited about responding to students in distress or intervening with disruptive behavior? And never do I get raised hands. Maybe every once in a while there's one person that likes to do it, but for the most part, that is not why you all chose your professions. And so we thought I could give you some tips and some tools. I've been working closely with the Teaching and Learning Commons, Carolyn Sandoval, on developing some information to push out to faculty on this topic. And we actually hope to start doing more presentations on disruptive behavior and addressing that in the near future. So some examples of disruption that you may see in your class environment are aggressive behavior toward others, including faculty and teaching assistants. So it might be directed at other students, but many times it's directed at the faculty member or teaching assistants who are working with those students. Threats of violence could potentially arise. Fortunately, that is not what we see most of the time. Most of the time we see the next bullet. So those students that like to argue or debate, right? Who's had one of those in their classrooms that like to argue or debate a point, or, you know, they want to prove that the faculty member is wrong, or that's not the only way to look at things. You know, I know you all have probably experienced that at some point. Or they want to argue and debate with other students in the classroom. And I think a little bit of that, or a little bit of the debating at least, is sometimes healthy in a classroom environment, but it's when it is unyielding and it becomes a problem, and it's hard to take control of that. So that's one of the examples that we like to talk about. Also talking, laughing, sometimes crying in class, if that happens, can be disruptive to the students around that student. I've had faculty report sleeping or snoring in class. That has been disruptive. So I hear a laugh at that. Has anyone had that in their classroom? Using laptops or technology, their phones, listening to music, anything in that manner can be disruptive in the class. And when we're talking about disruption, this can be in person or this can be while we're in a remote environment, right? So sometimes students, let's go back to the arguments or debates, sometimes they may take over a discussion board and just continue to argue and debate with other students to the point where other students don't want to engage anymore. That also can be disruptive. Or they are, you know, we can talk about incivility as well, like students who make inappropriate comments or maybe racist comments. We've seen that a couple of times, well, at least once I know of, in this remote environment. And we talk about, you know, the Zoom bombing and students taking over the sharing of a screen and putting up something that's offensive to others or inappropriate. And so any of those types of examples, even in a remote environment, can be a problem and a disruption to your class. So some of the ways that we can look at to minimize disruption are really setting clear expectations at the beginning of the class. So, you know, make sure that you are talking with your class about what are appropriate interactions at the beginning of the course. Putting some of those things in your syllabus is important. So making it clear when it's appropriate to use laptops in your classroom, or how you want students to engage with one another in classroom discussions or on a discussion board. What you might consider to be some examples of disruptive behavior. So that list that I just gave you, you may just want to put in your syllabus. And the Teaching and Learning Commons does have some resources on this, and they're continuing to develop more. So that's a good, if you want to go to their website and look at the resources for faculty, I'm sure they have some information on there about these items that I'm talking about. Another way to minimize disruption is by upholding free speech and encouraging respectful behavior. So again, it's important in an academic environment to uphold free speech and give students the ability to engage in free civil discourse with one another, but making sure that they're doing it in a respectful and reasoned manner with others. And so although some free speech might be upsetting and unsettling to students, we have to remind them of the unique learning opportunity that is available when they engage in civil discourse with one another. Making sure that students understand that it's okay to have differing opinions and ideas and beliefs, but because that's really essential to a vibrant and educational environment, but also that they need to be respectful of others as they engage in that right that they have. And I know that can be challenging sometimes in the classroom environment. Another tip for just minimizing disruption is addressing inappropriate behaviors early and consistently. And I can't explain how important this is. Because sometimes what we'll see is that a student, maybe sometimes they're intimidating, or they're just, you don't want to have to deal with them. And so they may get away with it for a while. And then all of a sudden, it's really caused a problem, and it's time to address it. But it's harder to address it when it's been happening like all quarter than when it happens the first time. And so really the first time that you see inappropriate behavior, it's important that you address it and make sure that you communicate your expectations to the student on how they should behave moving forward in your class. Not here, but this was at a previous institution that I worked at. I remember several times there were faculty members who they got to the end of the semester and they would call and say, I need this student removed from my class. Here's what they've done kind of all semester long. And so it was really challenging because it might be, 2 weeks left in the semester that they were asking to remove the student, yet none of the previous behaviors had been addressed. So when you address it early, it's easier if you need to refer that student to our student conduct office. It's earlier to say, I already tried to address it with them once and they just continued, and we need to escalate this to a conduct issue. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the tips for addressing disruptive behavior. So typically if it's not threatening or violent in nature, then you can typically wait until after class, or invite a student to office hours or a Zoom chat to discuss the disruptive behaviors. But if they happen in your class, I would recommend doing it as soon as possible after the disruption occurs. Making sure that you ensure your own safety is important. So if you are in person, if it's safe, you would wait until after class and speak to that student in private if you feel okay about that. And that might be for a disruption that's, a student who's listening to music during class, or some other type of violation. Again, that's not threatening or violent in nature. Start the conversation from a place of care. So, and I know how frustrating disruptions can be. I worked in student conduct for many, many years, and it's hard to kind of remain calm, especially if you've had it up to your neck with a student. But just speaking with them from a place of care and really showing that you're concerned about them helps de-escalate that situation and can help you address it more easily than if a student is on the defensive or upset or angry. Being steady, consistent, firm, yet respectful. So treating them like you would want them to treat you is important. Be specific about the behavior that's disruptive, and then discuss what appropriate behavior would look like, and set those expectations, set those clear expectations. Ask the student, once you've had that discussion with them about what their disruptive behavior was, and you've set your expectations, ask them, do you have any questions? Because moving forward, this is what you're expected to do. If sometimes the student just needs to be acknowledged, their feelings need to be acknowledged, and they need to be listened to. So they might be upset about something. And that's where coming from that place of care also helps. So just giving them the space to talk a little bit. I had a student once who was he would come across as very angry and intimidating. It was initially in an advising office where none of the advisors wanted to meet with him anymore. They were afraid of him. He was a big guy. He would yell a lot, and they got to the point where, like, we can't meet with the student anymore. And so I had a conversation with the student, and he started yelling at me. And so when I say a conversation, it was really me just sitting there listening and him yelling for a while. And even my colleagues came by my office and looked in my window and would say, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And I let him go for about 30 minutes. And afterwards, then I let him know, like, his behavior is not appropriate. No wonder why people don't want to help you. That's why you're feeling like nobody wants to help you. So let's talk about ways that we can move forward from this, and you can get the appropriate help that you need, while also behaving in the way that you need to be respectful to others. And that was really my meeting with him. And we moved forward from that. And I saw him, he was getting ready to graduate. It was the same semester. We were worried he wasn't going to graduate because nobody wanted to help him. And he really said, "I just want to tell you how invaluable you were in my life." And I thought, I really didn't do anything. I mean, all I did was listen to him one day, but sometimes that's what students need. Again, sometimes disruption really is just a form of distress that's exhibiting itself in a different way. So informing necessary parties when you do have a disruptive student and you've had this conversation with a student. So maybe depending on your area, you may report it to Dean Della Coletta, or you may report it to your department chair. So depending on what you're instructed to do, but you always want to make sure that somebody else knows that this has occurred. And then following up in writing is always helpful. You know, thank you for meeting with me. Here's what we talked about. Here's where your behaviors that were inappropriate. Here's how you're expected to behave from this point on. I look forward to having you in my class for the rest of the quarter, as long as you're able to act in the ways we discussed, you know? And so making sure that you're reinforcing those expectations with the student is important. Now, when we talk about threatening or violent behavior, that kind of rises to another level. So if there's an immediate safety concern in a classroom, you potentially would want to dismiss the class and call 911. So if that's some type of threatening, violent, life-threatening behavior, that is what your option is in that situation. But if the situation can be diffused and you feel comfortable speaking to the student after class, that is encouraged, but you want to make sure that you find a safe place to meet. Nice thing about a remote environment, you don't have to be with them face to face, but that will end at some point. So, so just remembering when you do find a safe place to meet that you keep the door open if necessary and position yourself closest to the exit. So making sure, you know, that student would not be blocking your exit is important. And it's okay, like if you feel, you know, sometimes people worry about leaving a door open because, oh, someone's going to overhear, I might violate FERPA. Your safety comes first in that situation. I mean, I had a student I was meeting with once, and he even said, "Can we shut your door?" And I said, "No, I prefer to leave it open," because it was in this type of situation. So you are in control of that situation. You just make sure that you do what you feel comfortable with. It's also important if you're meeting with someone that you feel uncomfortable meeting with, you make someone else in your office aware of that. Sometimes having a code word or phrase in your workspace to indicate an emergency is helpful. So for instance, I was recently meeting with, I was doing a presentation for the admissions office, and they told me, well, don't repeat this. Maybe I'll change up their code. But they have a code where they say they're, if they feel nervous, they put their head out the door and say to someone, I think my meeting with Chancellor Khosla is in a few minutes. Well, nobody in admissions is really meeting with Chancellor Khosla, but that's their code to indicate that they are in some type of danger or they're concerned about their situation, and someone may come in and wrap up that meeting, or it may mean to call the police. It depends. I don't know how they have it ironed out in their space, but it's important. So the place I used to work, we used to call it the red folder, right? We used to put our head out the door and say, can you get me the red folder? And that was an indication that I needed help. Again, this isn't something that has to be used often, thankfully, but it's good to have with your colleagues who work around you just in case. Also, stay calm and use non-confrontational approach with the student. No matter how upsetting they may get you, it's not, you want to stay calm and try to de-escalate that situation. And then don't mention discipline or calling the police, as that may increase their level of agitation. That's why if you need to have the police involved, you would have a code word to tell somebody else. And then the part about don't mention discipline, it wouldn't be helpful to say, well, I'm going to refer you to the Office of Student Conduct. Like, just wrap up that and refer them to the Office of Student Conduct if you need to, because we don't want to increase their agitation or get them more upset in the situation that they're in. Any questions on that part? Okay. So now I wanted to talk about resources. So resources for faculty, whether you're working with students in distress or whether you're working with students who are disruptive. We have a lot of resources on campus that are available to you, and all of them are still available even though we're working remotely. So I mentioned the Triton Concern Line, which some of you may be familiar with and others may not, but the Triton Concern Line is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week line that we have that faculty and staff can call when they are concerned about a student. And one of the questions I get often in these presentations are, you know, I was concerned about a student, but I wasn't sure based on the level of concern if I should call the Triton Concern Line or not. It doesn't matter. If it's a very minor concern, if it's a big concern, you can call the Triton Concern Line for anything. You don't have to determine like when it's appropriate to call them. The person who answers on the other side of the line is a clinician, a licensed clinician that will assess the call in the situation. If it is an emergency, they will indicate to you that they feel it's an emergency and they will connect you to campus police. Now, again, they're not going to connect you. It's very rare that they're going to connect you with campus police, so I don't want you to think just because you call that's going to happen. Typically, what they're going to do is they are going to listen to what the concern is, sometimes they'll provide you with resources to pass along to the student. So they might say, oh, well, this sounds like something the student may benefit from if they call the counseling center, and they may provide you the number or resources for CATS. They may say, we'll have a staff member follow up with the student. So they have a whole way of assessing what the next appropriate step is, and then they will let you know kind of what the plan is. They will also ask you as the caller if you would like follow up, and that's important because they will need to get your email address for the follow up. If you indicate that you do want follow up, then they'll get your email address so somebody follows up with email. Right now, is Jonathan Cohen on the call by chance? No.
Yes, I am.
Oh, yay, Jonathan. So I'm happy to report that we are also now following up with phone calls. Anna Bowens, who is, she was the one who said that I had gotten knocked off with the internet. She is our intake coordinator. And so when faculty are indicating that they would like follow-up, she's calling them to gather more information and also let them know specifically who that call is being directed to. Then in addition to that, it's usually being routed to a dean of student affairs or the assistant dean in the graduate division. And in addition to that, once they receive it, they will follow up with the caller via email as well. So.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited to hear that.
Yeah, and Jonathan's been a great advocate for follow-up with the Triton Concern Line and for supporting faculty. And so that's why I kind of called him out on this, this call. Any questions about the Triton Concern Line?
I actually have a question.
Sure.
Let me just enable my video here. There we go. So to me, the dilemma is always the problem of academic concerns as opposed to distress and mental health concerns. Because there are some students who are just not adjusting well specifically to the academic requirements.
Mm-hmm.
They may, you know, not do well on their assignments. They may be late in submitting things. They may not show up to class regularly, not necessarily because something is fundamentally wrong, but because perhaps they're not ready for college, which what I'm curious about is how are we perceiving of those situations? Are those just the cases we should say, hey, you know, student, this is your responsibility. You're supposed to be able to manage it. If not, that is your choice, beyond the fact that, of course, you know, encouraging them and checking in and all of that. Is that a matter that we would call a student of concern, or is that just a student who's not doing well? And we have those. I'm always perplexed about that particular element.
Well, we don't know until we really kind of dig into what's going on with that student. And so that's a great example of a situation where you might not be sure whether or not to call the Triton Concern Line, but you certainly can. Sometimes those academic challenges are because they're experiencing something else in their life that is distressing to them. And sometimes it's not. But what will happen in that situation, even if you just think it's an academic concern that's reported, it will get routed to that Dean of Student Affairs in that area. That Dean of Student Affairs can connect with the Dean of Academic Advising at the undergraduate college level, or the Assistant Dean in the Graduate Division connects with the graduate programs to kind of work through academic challenges for students. But it will be routed to someone who can do appropriate follow-up, whether it's academic, mental health, family concern, a basic needs concern. I don't want you all to think of this just as a mental health like helpline or concern line. It's really we want to provide a web of support and services for students to make sure that whatever challenges or barriers they're facing, we can help eliminate or reduce those.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions specifically about the Triton Concern Line? Okay, so I'm going to try to share a new screen. Let's see if this works. So I also wanted to share our website that we have to support faculty, and we like to refer to it as our Culture of Care website, but it's really a website that we want to make sure you all have access to for resources in supporting students in distress. So you can find it by going to the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs webpage. So that's where it's housed under Student Affairs. And then if you go to Faculty Resources, it pops up here. On here, there's information about students that may need support and what they look like, or you know what that means. It has the guide for supporting students in distress. And so this is the red folder that we refer to. Sometimes you'll see these hanging up in classrooms. Typically in this presentation, if I was in person, I would give you one. And so I can certainly send some over to your areas when we're back on campus, so you have one. And this is just kind of a snapshot of what we talked about in this presentation, but we call this the red folder. Go back. Also on this website, we have just a snapshot of the indicators of distress, some of them that we talked about, how to respond to students in distress or how to respond to a situation. So does the student pose a danger to themselves or others or need immediate assistance for any reason? It gives you a little chart about like, yes, here's what to do. Unsure, here's how you can manage the situation. No, here's another option on a way to manage the situation. So just some tips on how to manage distressed students. Tips for interacting with a distressed student. We've got some faculty and staff resources under here. So how to support students of concern. Just some training, education, and resources that we offer through case management services. There's a discussion about the behavioral threat assessment and management team. So that's a team that manages cases that are either deemed where the student is deemed to be a threat to the larger campus community, or they're causing significant disruption in various areas of campus. So those are usually escalated up to the behavioral threat assessment and management team. It's an interdisciplinary team of people from around campus that can come together and decide, you know, how to move forward with whatever the situation may be. They not only address concerns of behavior regarding students, but also they address concerning behaviors of faculty, staff, non-affiliates, so anyone that might be a potential threat or disruption to the larger campus. We have information about the faculty and staff assistance program because we recognize that working with students in distress can sometimes impact the well-being of the person who is trying to manage that situation. So I want to make sure that everyone's always aware of the faculty and staff assistance program, as well as the Office for the Prevention of Harassment and Discrimination, in case a student that they're working with wants to report, you know, an incident of sexual violence or discrimination, harassment, any of those types of incidents. There's some additional information just about the Triton Concern Line and how the Triton Concern Line functions. Our staff is listed here. Actually, there should be a couple others listed here that we are adding. There's a few things that we're in the process of adding. So we're adding the rest of our staff. So if you ever just want to consult about a situation, like maybe you called the Triton Concern Line, but you also want to talk to someone, or maybe it's just a situation where you're thinking about addressing it, but you want some tips or some guidance on it, you can always reach out to a member of the case management staff, and we're happy to help you with that. So our contact information is on here as well. If you wanted to do another training, you can fill out a training request form on this website, which is always available if you wanted us to come to your specific department to do a training and we can tailor it to certain topical areas. We're happy to do that as well. There's also a health and well-being statement in here, and I have a slide on this, so I won't go into it right now, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. Again, connection to the Triton Concern Line, some resources for students, and then also some information about privacy laws and FERPA. One of the things I like to mention during this presentation is that sometimes people are concerned about sharing information with either us or a Dean of Student Affairs because they're worried about potentially violating FERPA. But as long as that person has an educational need to know, or if there's a safety concern involved, safety or health and well-being concern involved, you can share that information freely. So we don't want FERPA to limit people from sharing information. As long as, again, as long as you could justify why you were telling that person. So maybe if you were telling your friend who works in athletics about a student of concern, it might not be appropriate. But if you were reporting it to case management services who could provide support to that student, or to a Dean of Student Affairs who could provide support to that student, CAPS, all of that would be legitimate educational need to know. So it would be okay to share that information. So just a great website. Keep it bookmarked for yourself in case you are looking for some resources. Now let me figure out how to get back to my. Okay. Oops. That's sensitive. Okay. Some other resources, again, I already mentioned our team. CAPS is a resource for you as well. I know, again, they spoke to you a few weeks ago. They can work with you on consulting about a student. They can provide resources for a student. We work very closely with CAPS. Our case managers are each assigned to one of the CAPS social workers, depending on the college that they work in. And so they have connections where they're speaking to the CAPS social worker daily. We help support in tandem students who are coming out of the hospital. They work with both of our areas to make sure that we are connecting them to resources for ongoing mental health needs in certain situations. And so, again, they are very student-centered and a great resource to connect with. And then, of course, the deans of student affairs. Sometimes people aren't sure when it would be appropriate to connect with a dean of student affairs, but any concern regarding a student is an appropriate time to connect with a dean of student affairs as well. Again, the deans of student affairs can connect students directly to case managers. And so for students who need ongoing support, they may refer them for case management. Definitely students coming out of the hospital typically meet with our case managers for quite a while to make sure that they're continuing with their care, keeping up with their medications as necessary. If they're, having thoughts of, I'm not sure if I want to continue medication, our case managers will make sure that they're still seeing their psychiatrist for medication management. So it's another level of accountability for those students, especially the ones who need that additional support. Also, I did not put them on here, but as I already mentioned, the Teaching and Learning Commons is a great support resource for faculty. And again, they are developing out their resources, especially around disruptive behavior. We are going to add a link to our website and to their website that has some of this disruptive behavior information, so that creating a culture of care website will house some disruptive behavior information as well. And then finally, I also, in regards to disruptive behavior, the Office of Student Conduct is another great resource. And a lot of times people are hesitant about contacting the Office of Student Conduct because it might be a situation where the faculty member or the TA doesn't want to get them quote unquote in trouble, but they need someone to have an educational conversation with them about their behavior and how it's inappropriate, and maybe the faculty member has tried but it's not getting through to them. Our Office of Student Conduct is very student-centered and educationally focused, and so their goal is not to put some type of probation or suspension on a student's record. Really, their goal is to educate that student, intervene early, and hopefully create a change in behavior that will allow that student to continue and be successful. And so they are great to consult with. Maybe you're not ready to report a student for behavior to them, but maybe you just want to consult about a situation. They're another great resource for you, especially when it comes to disruptive behavior in the class environment. If you do feel like it needs to be reported as a student conduct violation, they have a reporting form on their website that you can fill out, and that will go to them for review and then follow up with the student. And then finally, I just wanted to circle back to that health and well-being syllabus statement, because I know that we have it on that website, but I just want to make sure that you all see this. This is a great resource to put in your syllabus for students. Again, right off the bat, when a student reads it, they know they're in a caring environment. They know that UC San Diego faculty are here to support them. This is just an example of a statement. You can certainly change it to make it fit your area, or put other resources in there that you think are important for students. But it's just a really, I think, great way to send a message to students that we care about them and we care about their success here. So that is the presentation. And so I want to make sure I leave time for you all to ask any questions or follow-up discussion that you might have. You may have questions about other resources on campus that I can answer for you. So just want to open it up to the floor. So maybe you don't have any questions.
I do.
Okay.
I'll raise my hand.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I see it raised. Okay, sorry about that.
Is there any, the whole Zoom fatigue, migraines, eyeball burning, I've suggested the glasses. Walmart has them, I think, for $6.99. But is there anything particular from the UCSD Health, just to help? Because sometimes I can't tell whether the students are just having a really rough time or if Zoom is just this giant factor. They're showing up, they're staying cheerful, but it's hard for me to tell some of those things on your list because I can't really see into the camera. And sometimes they say to me, I just have to turn the camera off. I've just had a 3-hour class and your class is after it. And I want to respect the pain. I feel the same pain at the end of 5 hours of meeting.
Yeah.
So things that we can do to help them, support them. I do take breaks. I do have them move. I do play music. We do meditation. But it seems to be a pervasive thing that Zoom can be quite a factor health-wise.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate all that you're already doing for them that you just mentioned, but I would say if they're experiencing that, maybe encouraging them to contact Student Health Services. Their nurses line can help. They're available to consult if they're having, headaches or eye fatigue. If they have an actual accommodation that's needed, they can still contact the Office of Students with Disabilities for support and register with them. So if they have some type of medical condition that says they can't be on the computer for 3 hours at a time, they should be registering with disability services, and then you should be getting notified from that area that they have a special accommodation. So it sounds like you're being very flexible with them and supportive. So those would be the additional things I might recommend.
Yeah, and I did a questionnaire at the beginning, and they did share, like, I have a migraine diagnosis and things like that. But a lot of the things that have come up are surprising to them. Why can't I concentrate? And I was like, well, I don't think it's just you.
Yeah.
I think it's a really hard mode of learning, particularly for certain kinds of things that take more time.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
I have a student who is a returning student, and he was laid off from his job, and now he's working 2 fast food jobs to try to stay in school. And he was so alienated by the Zoom stuff that he just wasn't doing anything. And then this absolutely brilliant person in the Teaching and Learning Center, Leah Clement, had me design a mid-quarter self-assessment. And that, really made him think about what he was doing and how he wanted to keep going. But my question is, he's got these 2 horrible jobs, and he's DACA, he's not a US citizen. And I'm just wondering whether he's going to be able to get any financial assistance through the CARES money. And I mean, I sent the link onto him, but is there anything else I can tell him to do to get some financial support so that
Yes.
he can stay in school?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. We do have, so you're right, a lot of the funding, the state funds and the federal funds are not available to all students. But we do have, we've had a generous donation of $100,000 from our alumni foundation to support students who may not otherwise qualify for certain needs. Also, a lot of the state funding that we have through basic needs is only, we can only spend that on food and housing needs, but our students are facing various other needs as well. So like transportation, childcare, whatever it might be, we can use that Alumni Foundation Fund for that as well. So what I would recommend is that you encourage him to submit if you go, and I could probably pull this up.
That would be, yeah.
If you go to the Basic Needs website, let me share my screen again.
Ah, okay.
So if you go to the Basic Needs website, they have assistance forms. There's the Basic Needs Assistance Form. That is for a one-on-one consultation with either a staff member from Basic Needs or a case manager. And that's to talk through some needs and connect them to resources. But if you go down here to this COVID-19 Special Relief Fund, that's specifically for students who are experiencing impacts from COVID-19. So, losing a job or having to pick up another job. And they can fill this out. What will happen is it will be reviewed by, we have a financial crisis response team. It'll be reviewed by financial aid, but it'll also be reviewed by this team. Students, if they're eligible for a basic needs emergency grant, they might get that. But in this situation, if it's a DACA student who might not be eligible for that, that student could be eligible for the Alumni Foundation Fund, which is all, again, still applied for in the same way. We just determine
So he would go through that same form, and then someone would decide where the money should come from?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, great question. I see some other hands up. Oh, maybe I have to put them down. Is that how this works? Ursula? Oh, you already asked your question, Ursula. Okay. Anyone else have a question? Joelle.
Hi. I'm not sure you can hear me okay. My computer in a little bit of a weird position right now. But so I work with students who we employ as mentors during our summer program. And so they'll be interfacing with other students and kind of reporting back to us. And I'm curious, like, of the resources that were shared on the Culture of Care website. It seems like some really great information, and I'm just wondering if that's appropriate to share with a student that's in a mentor position, or no, because that's more geared towards faculty and staff.
No, I think it's great to share with students who are in a mentoring position. And, one of our goals this year in case management services, we just hired a new team member who will serve as our case manager for graduate division, as well as an outreach specialist for our area. And so one of the things that we are going to have him working on are some student-facing presentations. So how to help another student who might be in distress, how to help a peer, someone you're in a mentoring relationship with. So we have a lot of student leaders on campus that work in that capacity, that see students of concern. But for now, I'm about sharing the resources that we have. So definitely, if you want to share the red folder. I know I say that the Triton Concern line is really for faculty and staff, which it is intended to be, but if a student calls that line, they're going to help that student out just as they would anyone else. We're going to try to expand that capacity in the fall and at least have a reporting form where students can go to fill out concerns about other students, especially these students who are in these leadership positions or who are, concerned about their roommate, a friend.
Right. And actually, I have one quick follow-up question while I have you. So some of the students have asked me, I think, that are going to be mentors, I think in efforts for them to try to prepare for whatever they might hear. If someone tells them something that seems like, I don't want to say disturbing, but maybe something that happened to them that isn't like immediately life-threatening or dangerous, do we have to report it? Or if they just tell us, like, do we just keep it to ourselves, or like obviously they would share it with us, their supervisors, but they were just curious about requirements as like employees of sorts.
So I think that's going to depend on the expectations set by their supervisor. But what we would recommend is if they hear concerning information that yes, they report it. I'll give you an example. We had a situation this year where I think it was a tutor in some capacity meeting with a student, got some really disturbing information and reported it, and then to their supervisor. And then the supervisor contacted us because they weren't sure if they had to report it. And what I always say is, as long as you're making a reasonably informed decision to hold it to yourself, you don't have to report it, but we're always going to encourage it. The follow-up that happens would typically, and you know, you would have the option as the supervisor to follow up. We just recommended in that particular situation that the supervisor follow up and come from a place of care and concern, like with the student who reported it to the tutor. And it ended up working out beautifully. Like they were afraid that that student wouldn't want to come back to tutoring, but I think how you approach the follow-up is what kind of defines how that student reacts to it. So it's a judgment call on whether or not to report it. We're gonna always say it's probably in your best interest to report it, especially if there's any concern that could potentially come from it. Definitely if there's like any type of safety concern.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? I see some other.
Yeah, I have a question. This is Lisa.
Oh, hi, Lisa.
Thank you, Mary, for your presentation.
Sure.
This is about anxiety about relocating, since one student in particular, a graduate student, has decided, you know, to move to save money since it's so expensive to be in San Diego, and concern about California residency. And I'm wondering, is there a resource page around those sorts of issues for students?
That I am not sure about right off, but I'm going to make a note, and I will. I can follow up with you. With I'm sure there is some type of resource. I just don't know where to find it right off, but I can certainly follow up and share that with you, and I can share it with Dean Della Coletta so she can send out to the rest of the group. So,
Lisa, is that a graduate students you're talking about?
Yes.
So I think Jim Anthony in the graduate student, the dean of the graduate division, has addressed that issue. So either you or I can ask him, because I know it came up, but I don't remember the answer.
Oh, fantastic.
So between Mary and I and you, will figure it out.
Okay, that sounds great.
There's been a theme of anxiety about relocating for a number of graduate students, so I'm trying to figure out, you know, how to help. So thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Any other questions?
Patricia has a question.
Oh,
yes. Hi. I'm sorry I came in late because I was in another meeting, but I had a question. If the student is ill and the HIPAA laws around that, I don't know how much I can speak to other faculty, if it's affecting someone's attendance, trying to help her with that person with other classes. Maybe I missed that in the first section. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah, we were talking about just if there's a legitimate educational need to know to share that information, you can certainly share it. What I wouldn't share necessarily is maybe if that student has shared like a specific diagnosis with you, you may not want to share that. But if you said to somebody else who needed to know, well, this student does have a diagnosed illness, and I wanted to share this information because I think it's important, you know, to help support the student, you could definitely share that information as long as you're sharing it with someone who has in their job capacity the responsibility to support that student or help that student in that way.
So what if it's not knowing what the illness is, but knowing that the person went to a hospital something like that.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay to share.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other hands? But now I'm realizing how difficult it must be to teach a class online, because I see like hands are going up, people are asking questions in the chat. I'm getting a little taste of what you all do daily. So please let me just speak out if you have a question, because I'm not seeing all the hands. All right. Well, it doesn't sound like there's any more questions. Again, I really appreciate you providing the space for me to do this presentation. I am going to send a recording of this following. We'll probably get it out on Monday. So you all can have it, or you can pass it along to your colleagues who weren't able to join us today. And then we will also be posting this video as well as the previous video that CAPS did a few weeks ago on that Culture of Care website too. So if you want to go back to it at any time and review the other presentation, that'll be there as well.
Thank you very much, Mary. That was a great presentation. Thank you for your time and for all the information you gave us.
Yes, I know it was a lot, so feel free to follow up if you have any questions.